used to me preaching here, so they know that the heat's going up.
Hi, Merle.
Hey. All right, Gary Little. Don't have to do. Appreciate you all being here this evening. It's really good to get together and sing and renew our friendships. We don't get to see each other as often as we should, so I really enjoy these round robin meetings, and I know you do too. Well, so Randy Rankin began last night with the challenges facing the church, and his challenge, the one he chose was spiritual warfare. My choice tonight of challenges that are facing the church is the challenge of holiness. Does that ring a bell with anybody? What would that mean? The challenge of holiness. You know, the Lord has always called his people to holy living. In fact, Peter wrote it to the Christians in Asia Minor in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 15 and 16. He's actually quoted in the Old Testament where the Lord says, "Be holy because I'm holy." So we've been called to be holy. This commandment from Leviticus 11 and 19 requires the same thing of Israel. So we're in line with the holy people of God, the people of God, down through the ages, who've been called to be holy. My question is, you feel you're up to it? If we had to take an interview everybody who's here this evening, and you had to give us your opinion as you left, would you feel like you were qualifying as someone who is pursuing holiness, someone who is being holy like the Lord is holy? How would you know how to answer that question? What's that even asking of us? Be holy because I'm holy. Are you convinced that you're fulfilling that calling? What's God asking of his children? What is holiness? What does it mean to be holy? I think most of us think that it has something to do with moral perfection. So we're confused about just what God is asking of us. I don't believe it's that. I don't believe he's asking of us moral perfection because we do come far short of that goal. And I don't think God would ask us to achieve moral perfection. What would be the use in the sacrifice of Christ if we could reach moral perfection on our own, if it just took a little more effort? Let me shed some light on this concept of holiness so that we are better able to understand the requirements that are being put on us and to meet those requirements. As it turns out, the root definition of the word holy, or hagios in the Greek, actually means to be different, to be set apart. If you wanted to get to its primary definition, that's the definition for holy. To be different, to be set apart from a larger group. Now, most of you might have already known that, but maybe we haven't thought through that as well as we should. I don't know about you, but I've lived some 70 years on this earth, and I've seen some things that easily qualify as different, that set people apart and make them different. One of the most obvious, for instance, one of the most obvious things I've run into over the years has been hairstyles. Right? Hairstyles come and go. They change over a lifetime. You know, when I was young, people grew their hair out really long to be different. Right? It was a short crew cut kind of thing that was going on before that, and so somebody wanted to be different, they grew their hair out really long. Well, that eventually ran its course, and people, young men, had to find out some way to be different in another way. So how do they become different? Well, they followed the laws. Now, we're in Oklahoma, so you know what the laws are. Brian Bosworth, you remember the haircuts he used to bring? football. He had his hair cut in all these different shapes and tinted in various fades, various colors. That's what it took to be different for him. Things have changed since then, right? Things have changed a lot, and you can tell the issue is being different. These people want to be different. So if that's what being different is, if that's how you achieve being different, what's the Lord requiring of us? Different hairstyle? I don't think so. What is the Lord requiring of us that we might be holy or different? What does it mean to be different like the Lord? That's what he's saying. Be holy or be different like I'm holy. Well, first, let's look at what it meant for Israel to be holy like the Lord. The phrase that Peter quotes comes directly from two passages in Leviticus chapter 11 and Leviticus chapter 19. We're going to spend some time reading those and find out just what the Lord defines as different. Here's what he says in chapter 11 of Leviticus. Beginning in verse 42, "You're not to eat any creature that moves along the ground, whether it moves on its belly or walks on all fours or on many feet. It is unclean. Do not defile yourselves by any of these creatures. Do not make yourselves unclean by means of them or be made unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy. Do not make yourselves unclean by any creature that moves along the ground. I am the Lord who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore, be holy, because I am holy." Twice he says that. What does it take to be holy? Well, it restricts what you eat, right? He said, don't eat anything that crawls around on the ground. Does that mean you can't eat rattlesnake? Anybody here eat rattlesnake? I've had some folks who've told me they ate it and it tasted like chicken, so I thought I'd just stick with chicken. I'm not worried about the rattlesnake, but they can't, listen, if you're an observant Jew, if you're a faithful Jew, you don't eat rattlesnake. You don't eat something that crawls along the ground. What's the matter with eating rattlesnake? Because it will defile you, it says. It will make you unclean according to the Lord. Right? The Lord determines this, and he says, look, if you eat that, it will make you unclean. Where other cultures can do this, other cultures can cook up their rattlesnake or whatever other thing that moves along the ground and eat it. Israel doesn't have that opportunity. They're told not to do that. And so they're different. They're different because to follow the covenant, to follow the requirements of the covenant, means they can't eat that kind of food. The distinction becomes clear in chapter 19, where we find, be holy because I'm holy. Here's what the Lord writes in chapter 19, beginning in verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Each of you must respect your mother and father, and you must observe my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols or make metal gods for yourselves. I am the Lord your God. When you sacrifice a fellowship offering to the Lord, sacrifice it in such a way that it will be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the third day. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it, or on the next day. Anything left over until the third day must be burned up. If any of it is eaten on the third day, it is impure and will not be accepted. Whoever eats it will be held responsible because they have desecrated what is holy to the Lord. They must be cut off from their people. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap the very edges of the field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I'm the Lord your God. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not deceive one another. Do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Do not defraud or rob your neighbor. Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind. But fear your God. I am the Lord. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord. Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly, so you will not share in their guilt. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. There's a passage we all know. I am the Lord. Keep my decrees. Do not make different kinds of animals. Do not plant your field with two kinds of seed. Do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. The commands that the Lord gave Israel at Sinai, it turns out, the very things that were repeated in those commands, made Israel different. It set the Jews apart. While other cultures could, for example, disrespect their parents, not so God's people. They can't call their parents fuddy-duddies or, you're behind the times. You guys need to catch up. Right? I don't listen to my mom and dad. They don't know what's going on today. Right? You can't disrespect. Some cultures do. Some cultures encourage that attitude toward the elderly. But not so among God's people. He restricts that. You can't be like the other cultures. While other cultures may create their own calendar, he says you've got to observe my Sabbaths. That's not true for the Israelites. It was interesting, after the French Revolution, they decided they would rewrite the calendar. And they tried to do away with any holy days or even days that were written around what at that time was understood to be the Christian calendar, things that might have something to do with celebrating Christ or celebrating religion. They did away with it. They decided they would change all of that, and they did, but it didn't work. Everything fell apart as a result of this change they made. When they tried to write their own calendar, they couldn't come up with one. They couldn't come up with a calendar that would fit everybody or suit everybody. And so you can't write your own calendar in Israel. You're told that. You need to observe the day that the Lord has set aside to be remembered, to rest on that day. You need to show Him respect by doing this. Other cultures may not show that kind of respect to the Lord. They may write their own calendar, but we're not going to do it in Israel. You also can't decide how you're going to worship God. You can't create your own, not only can you not create your own calendar, you can't create your own gods or idols. Generally, you create your own idol that's going to serve you and your interests. It's not what God might be interested in. It's not what might please God. It's what's going to please you. In Israel, God commands man, not the other way around, but in their day and in ours today as well. It seems that human beings make the rules, and God has to follow our rules. We decide what's right and wrong, and we have to listen to ourselves rather than to God. This is what sets Israel apart. They were told they couldn't do that. They had to show respect for God's rules. Their culture decides what meat is outdated, not Israel. Other cultures may determine what's acceptable sacrifice, not Israel. Other people may squeeze the last little bit of profit out of their harvest, not Israel. They've got to make provision for the poor and the foreigner, be concerned about the poor and the foreigner. Other cultures may admire the thief, the liar, those who take advantage of the deprived and vulnerable. I've read this passage many times, and I can't imagine somebody wanting to trip a blind person or, insult someone who can't hear. And yet, that's what some people today would call humor. is using this person's vulnerability as a way of laughing at them. Israel was told, you can't do that. Other cultures may do that. You can't do it. Other cultures may believe in holding a grudge or seeking revenge, but not Israel. They're different. They're holy to the Lord. In fact, understanding holiness is what makes the difference for Israel. So, what does it mean for Israel to be holy? Well, if you were going to sum it up, you'd have to say this. Israel can be and will be holy if they keep the covenant they have with God. If they show respect for God and His covenant, then they'll be holy. They'll be set aside. What makes them different? It's the terms of the covenant that make them different. They're set apart. They're different because they obey the covenant. Again, they're not making up the rules for themselves. They're instead doing what God requires, what He requires in His covenant with them. And that was God's plan for salvation, the salvation of the world. Started early on when He called one family, Abraham and his descendants, through whom He would reveal Himself by His interaction with them, and through whom He would reveal the requirements of His covenant. And if they followed that covenant, it would make them different. It would make them holy. Different than all other families, and different than eventually this whole nation that carried itself out, that lived differently than everyone else. And this, God's requirements, that's what sets them apart. Is they choose to be obedient to God's covenant. Moses, or actually it was the Lord saying it through him, was afraid they might misunderstand and misconstrue this calling. So He warns them in Deuteronomy 7 and Deuteronomy 9 not to misunderstand what's going on here. He tells them, yes, I took you into the land. Yes, you're going to defeat people that are bigger, stronger than you are. But don't get to thinking that it's because you're so big and tough and you had everything right, because you aren't. In fact, at one point He calls them a stiff-necked people. I'm not running these people out of this land because you're so great. I'm running them out of the land because of their sin. It has nothing to do with who you are. It has to do with who God is. You were loved by God. And this is how God shows His love, is by rescuing you, by setting you apart, by blessing you. God has done this for His people because He loves them. So to be holy means to be faithful to the covenant, to be different by obeying the terms of the covenant. Their presence, Israel's presence in the world, the way their society was organized, the way they went about their business, the way they were called to treat each other was different. It was different than the rest of the world. It stood out and made them different if they followed the covenant. For instance, the way they worshiped. There were animal sacrifices elsewhere in the ancient world, but Israel had different motives than those other ancient cultures. They were seeking to be reconciled to God, to make atonement for their sins. They had to do it the way God asked. They had to show respect, and if they did, if they followed His covenant, here they were going to be a living example of who God is and His character and what was important to them. If they arranged their society in the way that God asked them to, then you could see in them and in their wisdom just the character of God. When they followed His covenant, when they did what He asked them to do, you could see who God was and what humanity's relationship was to God. They stood out from everyone else in the world because they became a way of God communicating to the rest of the world. This is who I am. look at these people. No, they're not perfect, but when they keep the covenant, they demonstrate who I am and what's important to me. I hope you can see that God's people today, the body of Christ, the Church of Jesus Christ, has the same calling. We have the same assignment. As Peter said, be holy because I'm holy. This is a call not for us to be more numerous or more righteous than everyone else, but to be faithful. To be faithful to the covenant. That's what he's called us to. And that's what we're after. We too are holy. We're set apart. Just like Israel was. Just like Israel in their temple sacrifices and the way they conducted their worship demonstrated how humanity was, had to be reconciled to God, how they were right now separated from Him. That was the whole picture in the temple, right? The temple has the centerpiece where only the high priest can go, and then the priests after that, and then the men, and then after that the women, and then the Gentiles. And it's just showing the distance that people are from God and what it takes to gather in His presence. What does it take? It takes obedience to the covenant. You can come into His presence, but only in the way that He has prescribed. But we're still operating that way today. In fact, Israel is, or the church is called the temple of God, right? You no doubt knew that. 1 Peter chapter 2, as you come to Him, the living stone, rejected by men but chosen by God and precious to Him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices, acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For in Scripture it says, see, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in Him will never be put to shame. Now to those who believe, rather, this stone is precious. To those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone, and a stone that causes men to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His wonderful light. They're all my favorite verses in the Bible, but that's right up there at the top. You are a chosen people. You've been set aside. You're a holy nation, different than the nation you live in. I know we're called to respect our leaders in the land and respect where we live. And Israel was even told to pray for their captors when they were in Babylon, to pray for their success, because it would mean that Israel would succeed also. But we're different than the nation that surrounds us. We're a holy nation. We've been set apart. We are different. What makes us different? The covenant. That's what makes us different. It's our goal. It's our effort to put the covenant into practice in our lives so that others can see God being demonstrated in the way that we live. Why do you do that? It's what our Lord requires. Why do you take the Lord's Supper every first day of the week? It's what the Lord requires. Why do you choose to worship in the way that you do? It's what pleases God. And we don't do what pleases us, we do what pleases Him. It sets us apart, makes us different, holy. We're holy to the Lord in that way. This context in which Peter quotes Leviticus 11 and 19 reads this way, beginning in chapter 1 and verse 13. Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Be self-controlled. Set your hope fully on the grace to be given you when Jesus Christ is revealed. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance, but just as He who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy, because I am holy. Okay, if you've got the New King James or maybe some other version, verse 13 starts off a little differently than it does in the NIV and the New American Standard. They both say, make your mind alert or prepare your minds for action. It actually reads this way, gird up the loins of your mind. Okay, you know what that is. When you gird up the loins of your mind, what you're doing is you're wrapping everything up, getting ready to move out. And so you're going to pull the folds of your garment in and make sure you're ready to move on. You're going to do that by girding up your loins. Well, this says gird up the loins of your mind. How would you do that? Well, you focus, right? Concentrate. Get your focus on one thing or on several things. But restrict your concentration to these few things. And what are they? He says, be sober. That's the first one. Be different than the world around you by being sober. Prepare, and then he tells us, rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. What is that asking us to do? If you're going to be holy, you're going to be looking forward. You're going to be looking to the consummation of things, to the revelation of Jesus Christ. As I've pointed out before in sermons, we're not thinking about Jesus returning from the other side of the galaxy. We're talking about him appearing right now. He's in the midst of us because we're here gathered with each other. We don't see him. Our eyes don't see him. But there's a day coming when, in the blink of an eye, he will reappear. And we'll see him then. That's what Peter is saying. Here's how you live a holy life. Here's how you live a different life. You look forward to his coming, to his reappearing. We know he's there. I know he's unseen, but we know he's there. And as your faith grows, you come to understand that more and more. Jesus is there. Someday he will reappear. Are you watching for it? That's what it means to be holy. Some people live their lives without giving God a second thought, especially Jesus a second thought. Right? What do they have to do with Jesus, and what does Jesus have to do with them? No, they go on with their lives and live their whole lives without ever giving him a second thought. But not us. We're Jesus' people. We're God's people. We're holy because we're focused on his return. We know he's coming. And not only that, he says, rest your hope fully on the grace to be brought to you in the revelation of Jesus Christ. What are we resting on? Grace. Hope fully on grace. Not your perfection, not your numbers, not your strength, not even our ability to keep the covenant perfectly, but grace. As obedient children, look forward to the grace that's going to be given to us on that day. If the truth be told, we don't like to be different. We stick out like a sore thumb, and we're not real comfortable with it. If we're going to be God's people, we've got to be different. We've got to be different in the way that the covenant requires, asks of us. There are things that set us apart from the world around us. And this is why I bring this up in the context of a challenge to the church. Here are the challenges that the church is facing. Is our call to be holy, to be different than the world around us. Yes, it will involve spiritual battles, as Randy told us last night. We'll have to fight it out to get there, but that's what we want to do. We want to be different than the rest of the world, not for the sake of being different, but for the sake of following the covenant and giving God the respect that he's due. I don't know if you've committed yourself to that or not. If you've made the decision to be holy in the way that God is holy, to let Him set you apart. Have you been putting all the, is that what consumes your inclinations, your attention? Are the things that make us holy? If you want to redouble your efforts tonight, if you want to return to a place where you had focused on the Lord and you strayed away from that, you want to move back to it tonight. You want to rededicate yourself to holiness. Again, not perfection, but being different the way the Lord asks of us. This evening is the opportunity to do that. In fact, you couldn't find a more encouraging crowd than this group of people to join you in returning to your commitment to follow the covenant, to bring God praise and glory by obeying. Maybe you've never been a Christian, you've never made the commitment. Tonight would be a great night for that also. To dedicate the rest of your life to being different like God is. If there's anything we can help you with this evening, we want to offer you the invitation. If you'll let us know what your need is while we stand and sing this invitation song.